This is Wildcat Country.
It's only right. The ball's in his hands. A milestone victory for Arizona. Simon says championship.
All the inside scoop on U of A athletics.
It's up for the end zone. Arizona has scored the touchdown. Wildcats win.
Let's go to work, fella.
Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale, and we're going to go right into it this week and bring on one of our favorite guests, Matt Moreno, senior editor for GoAZCats.com, to fill us in on everything that is going on, not only with Arizona recruiting, but with the with fall ball that has started in the last couple weeks. And Matt, I think the first thing that I want to hit on, it's something that I talked about with Shane last week. The quarterback play to me is very concerning, and nothing that I have read about camp has seemingly changed that. Would you agree that Arizona might be in trouble at the quarterback position?
I don't know if I'd say in trouble yet. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's what the coaching staff expected or wanted, but you're now talking about a team that's in the third week of camp and doesn't have a starting quarterback yet. I think we'll eventually get a name here pretty soon, but I think it's just because it's time to name somebody as opposed to somebody winning that job, which is never a good place to be in. There hasn't been a ton of separation between the three guys. It looked like for a while the top two with Will Plummer and Gunnar Cruz are really starting to separate themselves from Jordan McLeod, who wasn't here in the spring. I think that was kind of an important deal for everybody all the way around. This is not an easy scheme to pick up and not a system that you could just kind of jump right into and have a lot of success with in a couple weeks. I think you need some time with it. And for me, it really looked like Jordan McLeod. If you revisit him in a few months, you say, I could see where he could have a lot of success, but having only a couple weeks to really, get everything dialed in, I think it's just too short of a time span for him. But you never know. I mean, there's not a ton of separation. He's done some good things. He had a really strong scrimmage in their first scrimmage of training camp, and Jed Fish wanted to see, I think, what he looked like with the ones, because in that scrimmage, he was throwing against, the third string defense, working with the third group on offense, and you don't really get a good read of what he's actually capable of unless you have him with the first team. And so he had that opportunity this week. Looked okay, but threw a couple picks, and you never want to see that. You don't want to have turnovers, and so consistency has been kind of their main key as they look at this battle and what they really want. To me, if you're looking for most consistent, least amount of mistakes, is something they bring up quite a bit. That's Gunnar Cruz. He's kind of he feels like the safe pick. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Doesn't necessarily have the flash of the other guys. Isn't necessarily the guy that's going to have the huge explosive plays, although he's capable of it. But he's just going to be someone who is very consistent. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Isn't turning the ball over, which this staff has been very clear. They don't want the ball to be turned over, and that's going to be a big deal. And now you have Jordan McLeod throwing a couple picks when he gets his chance to work with the first team. Will Plummer has had a few interceptions thrown over camp, but Gunnar Cruz has kind of been that most consistent guy. And so if you listen to the coaches and kind of what they're saying is going to lead to whoever is going to be the starter, the criteria they're going to be looking for, it matches up a lot with Gunnar Cruz and kind of what he's shown. But Will Plummer is kind of a wild card. I kind of like him. I think you're going to get the bad. I think kind of what he's about. There's going to be some bad. He's going to turn the ball over. He's going to take some chances, but sometimes those chances turn out to be really good things, and he can provide those explosive plays. So three very different options, three options that I think are capable of running the offense. But right now, at this point in camp, to not have somebody defined and someone that you can point to that says he's the clear leader, it feels like trouble. But we'll see what happens over these next couple weeks.
Well, Matt, I prefer to think that the reason we haven't had a starter named yet is because all three were just so good it was hard to separate them. But I think you just pretty much shattered that illusion. Let's move on to some of the non-quarterback transfers. As far as the non-quarterback transfers that Arizona has going into this season, give me one on each side of the ball that's really impressed you throughout camp.
I think starting on defense, Jerry Roberts is somebody who I really didn't know a whole lot about. Everyone obviously talked about Trayshawn Hayward at the linebacker spot, coming from Western Michigan, where he'd won the MAC Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year in 2019. Everyone, I think, thought, well, he's going to be the guy. He's going to be the one that steps in and has a lot of success at the middle linebacker spot. He had some issues and didn't come in as early as possible, as early as everyone thought was going to be possible. Was delayed a little bit in getting to campus, got to with the team a little bit late, so he's playing catch up right now. In the meantime, Jerry Roberts, who everyone thought was going to be more of an outside linebacker, has stepped into the middle and really taken charge of that position and has done a lot of really nice things for Arizona at the linebacker spot, at the middle linebacker spot. I think he's someone you listen to the other players talk about him. Anthony Pandy has obviously been around for a long time, and he really is quick to point out Jerry Roberts and his ability to play the middle and control things for Arizona when they need someone like that with some experience to make the calls and really run the defense. So he's been impressive. Rashee Hodge Jr. from New Mexico State, a transfer. Someone tweeted at me, it's going to be interesting because if he can translate what he's been doing lately on the practice field to the games, Arizona is going to have, one of their more prominent defensive players be a New Mexico State transfer in each of the last 2 years. So he's been really impressive. He doesn't necessarily fit everybody's scheme, so it's kind of easy to see how he got overlooked and how he could end up at New Mexico State. And he was very productive there. And so he definitely had the talent level, but size-wise, he just doesn't necessarily fit everybody's scheme. Even at Arizona, he doesn't necessarily fit, exactly with what they want to do defensively at the linebacker spots. But this staff has been about finding a niche and finding kind of what fits every player. And if that's a play or two, if that's a package, a series that fits them, they're going to try and figure out how to best utilize each of these guys' skill sets. And with him, he's shown an ability to get in the backfield and make plays, and he has a lot of speed and he plays with aggressiveness, and that'll fit in with Don Brown's defense. So he's another one who's been impressive in terms of the transfers. Offensively, I think I look at Drake Anderson, the running back from Northwestern, another Arizona guy, went to Chandler High School, did some things at Northwestern, was very productive there, decided he needed a change of scenery, and now he's going to have an opportunity. But he definitely has a lot of shiftiness to him. He was with the team in spring ball and kind of showcased that quite a bit. But I think he's going to help this team in a lot of ways. It's not going to just be, giving him the ball and saying, hey, go make a play. I think they're going to use him a lot in the passing game, probably use him on special teams. And I think he's going to have a chance to really do a lot of different things for this team and really provide some explosiveness for this team in a lot of different ways.
I was going to ask you about the wide receiver position. Let me ask you about the wide receiver position, Matt, just because it seems like that's one area where Arizona has quite a bit of depth. And then you include Majon Wright, who just rejoined the team, who transferred and then came back. Eric will tell you, I've been really high on him. He made some great catches last season. How do you see the depth chart at the wide receiver position shaking out heading into week one?
I think it's better now than it was probably in the spring. I think Tavian Cunningham is somebody who you look at him and you say, wow, he's really kind of made some strides in terms of production. There was always that potential with him. He's such a fast guy. He's a track athlete and, runs track in the spring and missed some of spring ball just because he's dedicating part of his time to running track, but he has the speed and you always saw the potential with him. It just hasn't necessarily come out as much on the field. And so I think he's ready to kind of translate that to the field. And he's been really productive. If I had to pick, an MVP of training camp so far on offense, at least, I'd probably give it to him. He's just made a ton of plays every day and continues to really shine and outplay kind of his size. He's a smaller guy, but they can use him and they want to use him outside and inside. They're going to use him all over the field. And another guy who's going to, I think, be utilized in a lot of different ways in this offense. But he just continues to make plays in the end zone. I mean, that's a big part of what this coaching staff is really looking for offensively is score points, find ways to score points and get in the end zone. And he's been able to do that, I think, better than anybody. Stanley Berryhill has continued to have a strong training camp. He had a really strong spring coming off of a strong season. So he's really just continued to shine and be a big part of things. The outside guys are going to be interesting. I think Booby Curry, I thought he'd have a little bit better of a camp. He's definitely done some good things, but he's somebody on the outside that they could really use and see step up just to have that bigger outside threat. So you don't have to rely, on the smaller guys like Tavian Cunningham and Stanley Berryhill who don't have that, 6'3", 6'4" frame. Not that Booby Curry does, but he's a bigger guy and someone that they can utilize his size. So I think for him, he has to take another step forward if Arizona really wants to maximize things offensively. But I think they're going to lean a lot on Stanley Berryhill and Tavian Cunningham.
Matt, what's your impression of the current coaching staff as far as their enthusiasm, energy level during these fall practices as compared to the Kevin Sumlin staff and as compared to the Rich Rodriguez staff, just from the way you see it?
It's been really interesting. There's been a very relaxed kind of atmosphere around practice. It's not necessarily what I'm used to this time of year. It even feels more relaxed than in the spring. We'll see what that all means, but I think it's made the players have some confidence that everything's going to be okay. I think there's that kind of element to it, just kind of seeing how they approach practice. There hasn't been those moments where you go, oh, they're taking plays off or they're not even trying because it is so relaxed. I think they just feel very comfortable around this staff. So it's been interesting to see. I'm going to be interested to see how it looks once the games come, because then you can point to that and say, well, they need to be more intense, during practice and during camp. That'll be one of the criticisms, but it feels like they know when to turn it on and when to turn it off. Obviously, Don Brown is always going to be operating at a very high intensity level, and the defensive side of the ball, that coaching staff is always operating at a pretty high intensity level. But for the most part, there's been some quiet practices where you go, this doesn't even feel like it's, a few weeks out from the game, where it's very relaxed. And I think there's been a feel just of comfort around this staff or around this team during training camp. And so that's been different to see, because usually, Rich Rodriguez, for sure, it was every day was high intensity and it's a high volume, and you're going to hear a lot over the course of 2 or 3 hours that you're out there on the field. And it just hasn't necessarily been the same this time around, and with this coaching staff. And like I said, it even feels more relaxed compared to the spring with these same coaches. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out, but there's definitely been a different atmosphere. There's a lot of teaching going on, but I think there's a lot of positivity about how things are going right now. And I think that's resonating with the team, where they feel like, hey, we're turning the page and kind of looking back on last year and not worrying about it as much, and really just trying to figure out, what's the next step to really get better and try and win some games. But yeah, definitely the relaxed nature of camp has really been surprising to me in a lot of ways, and something that I've kind of noticed from start to this point now.
So if you were to put a record for Arizona, I know the over-under in Vegas is 2.5. I mean, I think we would all agree that 3 to 4 seems about right. Is there a chance in your mind this team could exceed that just based on the vibe around them, or is the ceiling probably 3 or 4 wins in your opinion?
I still think it's probably 3 to 4 wins. I think not having a quarterback at this point is a big deal. Unfortunately, you need that position in college football, and you want to have someone who's capable. And it feels like right now they're more in the mode of picking someone just to pick someone because they have to. I don't know that anybody's really earned the job or won the job outright. I do think there's been improvement from the quarterbacks, but I don't know that anybody's really taken hold and said, this is my job. And I think you look at someone like Gunnar Cruz, who has essentially all the things you want. You want, the size and the big arm, and, the ability to run the offense and the patience. And there's just been something missing with him, where you say, if he had just this one thing, an ability to really just be decisive and make plays, that's really been kind of the thing that's held him back over the course of camp, is just holding onto the ball a little bit too long, waiting a little bit too long for things to happen. And then by that time, he gets in some trouble. And so if he could just be a little bit more decisive, I think he would have this job wrapped up. But considering it's now, in the 3rd week of camp and that hasn't happened, it's a little bit concerning. So I think not having someone at that quarterback position, such a key position on the field for any team, but especially in this offense with a new system in place, you really need that quarterback to be solidified. And so to not have that, that's a little bit concerning. I think that is going to hold them back. We'll see what happens. Maybe there's some strides made in these next few weeks, but I think if they had that position solidified a little bit more, I think I'd be more willing to believe that they could win more than 3 or 4 games. But I do think the defense is going to have them in a lot of games. I think it's going to look a lot better than the last couple of years. There might still be those losses, but I think it's going to be probably a little bit more low-scoring games. I think they're going to do a better job of, keeping teams in check. You watch this Don Brown defense, through the course of practice and through the scrimmages and the live periods, and it is very confusing. They're doing a lot of different things, and I think, by this time the offense kind of knows what to expect a little bit. But other teams, I think, are going to have a difficult time figuring it out and deciphering really what they're even looking at. And so they're going to have to try and make quick decisions, and they're not really going to know even who's coming from where, and where that pressure is going to be coming from, if there's even pressure coming at all. And so I think that is going to put Arizona in a good position to really do some good things. But I still think it's probably around that 3 or 4 range right now.
Don Brown meeting Pac-12 offenses is definitely going to be a big storyline to watch this season. Let me ask you, Matt, let's slide into recruiting for a minute. The big story this week being T-Mac, who would have been Arizona's top recruit in or commit in I don't know how long, decided to play for Oregon instead of Arizona and USC, which were reportedly his other finalists. How should Wildcat fans take that? They got his Servite teammates, Noah Fafita and Kean Burnett, great gets as well. But is your takeaway from T-Mac not committing to Arizona that Arizona isn't quite ready to compete with teams like Oregon for athletes at that level? Or should Wildcat fans be more encouraged that Arizona was even in the mix this late in the game for a guy like that, or both?
I think it's a mix of both. I think looking back on it and you say, well, who was the other team involved? It was USC. And if you ask anybody who kind of knew what was going on with his recruitment, it was Oregon or Arizona. It was going to be one of those two schools. So you look at that and you say, well, Arizona beat USC in that scenario. So that's another positive. And if Oregon's not in the picture and T-Mac McMillan ends up at Arizona, they beat USC for 2 recruits in this class going head to head. And so I think that's a sign of progress. I know no fans are going to want to, look at the moral victory of saying, hey, at least they were in it. And, they made a strong push, probably as strong as you could make without landing a commitment. But I think it's a sign that things are going in the right direction. It felt like the perfect storm in a lot of ways. You obviously have 2 of his teammates already committed. One of them is his best friend, and Kean Burnett is also a very good friend of them as well. But it felt like everything was in place, and everyone, I think, assumes, well, they didn't get this, high 4-star type of kid. Who's the next one they can get? It was really about getting T-Mac McMillan. There aren't a lot of other 4-star options at wide receiver out there right now. So it was really about getting him, and now you kind of have to look at maybe some other options that are not as highly rated. But it felt like the perfect storm for them to make it happen. And so it would have been ahead of schedule, I think. But it shows, I think, that they're moving in the right direction to even be in the discussion, to be a finalist and have it be as close as it was for Arizona, I think is a good sign for them overall. But I still look at the rest of the class and some of the guys that they've added already, and you say it's headed in the right direction. A lot of the guys that are at the top of the class are not guys that would have committed to Arizona in the last couple of years. And so they're headed in the right direction, but still some work to be done for sure.
All right, last question for you, Matt, and we appreciate you joining us as always. I think you have to be our most frequent guest at this point. We're coming up on a year back on the podcast. We appreciate your time as always and the education. As of this recording, Arizona is number 42 nationally in rival recruiting rankings for 2022. Are they likely to move up that list, down that list, or stay right about where they are based on what you know about the remaining possible commits for this class?
I think with T-Mac McMillan, you're talking about potentially a top 25 class, which would have been pretty remarkable coming off of an 0-12 stretch. I still think they can do pretty good. I mean, Sterling Lane is a 4-star defensive end outside linebacker, is going to be deciding this week. By all accounts, if we recorded this next Tuesday, we'd probably be talking about him being committed to Arizona. So at this point, it's all kind of lining up for him to end up as a commit to Arizona. It's recruiting, so strange things can happen in the course of a few days. But at this point, it looks like they're going to, add another 4-star to this class, which will give them a nice bump. I've always said, just having covered this for as long as I have, and you look at, the teams that do well, and obviously it's going to be very difficult to compete with Oregon and USC every year and some of those schools that are at the top of the list. But if you can stick within the range of 30 to 35, you're going to have a chance to really win a lot of games and compete for bowl games and have a chance at, winning 9 and 10 games every year. And so Arizona hasn't been at that level for quite a long time. Really has only reached that level a couple times in my time covering the team. But it feels like being a top 35 class in 2022 is feasible and maybe even likely at this point. So if you can get into that range and get close to 30, I think it gives them an opportunity to really build on something and do some different things in recruiting to build on. I think the key is going to be winning some games. That's kind of the next step for this process. Obviously, if Arizona comes out and still doesn't look very good, even though everyone I think knows, all the recruits know that it's not going to be a great season. No one's expecting to win 10 games this year, but the reality of that and the thought of that are two different things. And Noah Fafita and some of these guys, if Arizona starts losing, they're going to hear about it from their their classmates and their friends going, oh, you're going to Arizona, and didn't they just lose to whatever team? And so that's kind of the next step that this staff has to get through. You have to get this group to signing day. That's a big deal, and that's a little bit of a ways away. But I think so far right now they're doing a good job of building this class. Like I said, Sterling Lane is going to be another key piece of this class that'll give them a nice bump, and then you kind of go from there. I also don't think you can completely close the door on T-Mac. I know there are some people. I know there are some people who think it's done, and obviously Oregon was his dream school, and he talked about that. But he still has a season to play with Kean Burnett and Noah Fafita, and there's a lot of time until signing day. I do think that if they do have a strong season, and they all work together very well, and they do well in their league, which is a very tough league in California, it could give them some thought about, hey, maybe I do want to play with these guys, and I want to join this program and be part of this team for the chance to play with my friends and also to play with players that are going to put me in a good position. I mean, when I talked to T-Mac, over the summer after he took his visit to Arizona, he talked about how important he's heard from just different players, how important it is to have a strong quarterback with you at whatever school you end up with. He has such a strong connection with Noah. He thinks very highly of Noah Fafita, and if they do have a strong season as a trio and as a team, I could see that door being opened a little bit more and being revisited, at a later time. So I think Arizona is going to do everything it can to continue that relationship. And obviously with the transfer portal, you never know what's going to happen down the road. Maybe it's a year or two down the line and T-Mac says, maybe I want to leave and go somewhere else. And Arizona, says, hey, we never stopped that communication. We always had, a strong relationship, and maybe that opens the door. But maybe if it's even before then, if this team has a strong season and if Arizona can put together some wins and maybe pull off an upset or two, I think that could change the story and at least give him something to think about before he ends up signing, whenever that time comes.
And finally, Matt, my last question, and great info as always, as I've told you in the past, and Adam Gorney last week when we had him on, it's like going to school, listening to you guys talk about recruiting and everything. So we always appreciate it. I asked Adam about this last week, and I want to ask you, going into 2021, I know this is a hard answer, but I'll go with it anyways. Arizona's starting quarterback in 2022 for the first game will be either A, on the roster now, B, Noah Fafita or a true freshman, or C, from the transfer portal. Where would you place your bet as of now?
That's a good question. I mean, I think probably Noah Fafita. I think absolutely Noah Fafita if T-Mac McMillan was coming. I think there's no way you can break up that group. I think it's such a talented group. You want to keep that nucleus together, and you want to keep, that group together. And I think maybe it's a little bit of a different situation now. I could see it being a transfer portal player. I mean, I think that's such a different element to what's going on in college football right now. You never know who's going to become available, after the season, and there's going to be some opportunities. I imagine there's going to be a lot of players who just say, I played one season at my school. I didn't get a chance to play, or I didn't like how it turned out. I didn't like the offense. By that time, everyone's going to get a chance to see what Jed Fish is able to do with his offense, running, a scheme and a system and a program for the first time. That could change things as well, and it could be a destination for players to come to Arizona because of the offense that they're running here in Tucson. So I think it's based on what we've seen so far, based how this quarterback competition has played out. I think the door is wide open for Noah Fafita. I think the door will be wide open for a transfer if it's somebody who fits the scheme. So I'm not sold on the players on the roster being one of the guys next season, but we obviously have to see how it plays out. But I do think Noah Fafita is going to have a very good chance to come in and step in and play right away.
Matt Moreno, senior editor for GoAZCats.com, always teaches us many things, and he's brutally honest. You can find that and more, with Shane and I as well, here on Wildcat Country. Well, great information, Shane, from Matt Moreno. I mean, you always learn so much when he's on. And I think the main thing that we talked about at the beginning and at the end is the quarterback play is not very good. I mean, Matt pretty much said it. Thus far, Gunnar Cruz and Will Plummer and Jordan McLeod have not impressed anybody. And that is a concerning sign. And that, as I said last week, is the reason I believe, Shane, that Arizona is not going to win more than 3 or 4 games.
It's concerning if, it's one thing if Will Plummer's in the mix for the job just because he's been that impressive during camp, right? If he's upped his game and looked better than he did at times last season, was able to make more accurate throws and not, turn the ball over, for one thing. It's another thing if Gunnar Cruz and Jordan McLeod just aren't any better than what Will Plummer was last season. That's a concern. So It's the fact that I think Jedd Fisch, and we talked about this off the recording with Matt. I mentioned I think Jedd Fisch really wants to be able to name a starting quarterback. I think he prides himself on being transparent and upfront with the media and not hide a lot of stuff. But the fact that he can't, I'm sure, frustrates him, not only for that reason, but the fact that he doesn't have a bona fide QB1. I'm sure he's got someone in mind who's got a lead, but we talked to Matt again away from the recording a bit, and he said there's really not been a great showing 2 days in a row from any of the quarterbacks in practice. So they'll have one good day, and then they might take a step back. So, yeah, you kind of need a quarterback to win football games. It's at least half of the, I don't know half, but at least a third of the game right there is having a decent quarterback. And there's a lot of good supporting pieces. I hope that whoever the quarterback is takes advantage of the depth and the speed at running back and wide receiver, throw some checkdowns, and doesn't make a lot of mistakes. But it seems like it's been a lot of mistakes in practice. We haven't been down there. Obviously, we rely on people like Matt to fill us in. We see some highlights on social media and everything, but it doesn't sound good. I really thought that at this point we'd know who the starting quarterback was going to be, and I'd have hopes that quarterback would be at least a middle of the road Power 5 QB, and that just hasn't materialized yet, and it is a concern. No two ways about it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no doubt that Arizona is going to lose football games in all likelihood because of their quarterback play. I think one thing that Matt said that was very interesting is expect to see lower scoring games than we're used to. I mean, the Rich Rod teams didn't play a lick of defense, so you were getting 45-42 every game, one way or the other, essentially. And, the Sumlin teams, last year, obviously, they didn't play a lick of defense because ASU dropped 70 on them. And in every game, I think Arizona gave up 30 plus last year. I'd have to go back and look at it, but it's pretty much a debacle. I think the Wildcats are going to hold a lot of teams under 30 points. I mean, you look at that BYU game, on September 4th in Allegiant Stadium in Vegas. I mean, that game, BYU is going to win, assuming they do, by scoring less than 30, 27-20, something like that. Can the Wildcats score in the 20s that often? I think that is the bigger question for me, because I trust Don Brown, and I trust what Matt said in that Don Brown is going to bring a different look than Pac-12 defenses have seen before. And I think you touched on that as well with Matt. I think the question is, offensively, we're going to get so frustrated. What can be done? Can they speed up the pace? Is it a quarterback change? I mean, what are they going to do offensively that's going to put points on the scoreboard? I think that's what concerns me the most.
I actually thought it was going to be the other way around, and I still kind of think it might be. But with the quarterback position as apparently as bad as it is, then a questionable offensive line on top of that, it's rough because Arizona has so many talented playmakers on offense at the tailback position, the wide receiver position. They got depth, it appears, and in both with returners and freshmen, including our guy Stevie Rocker at the tailback position, who we've had on a couple times. Drake Anderson, who I know Matt Moreno was even high on Drake Anderson, I think, back in the spring, and so there's not an issue there. But I really thought that offensively they were going to be okay, and defensively they're really going to struggle. ESPN has their SP plus rankings, and shocking, Arizona's last in the Pac-12. I sniped this information, by the way, from Sports Nation's Arizona Desert Swarm, because I'm not paying for that content. But SP plus has Arizona 75th overall in the FBS in offense and 111th on defense. So they don't think much of the Wildcats defense. Again, that information is as much as is worth as much as you pay for it. And in my case, it's nothing. I do think Don Brown is going to be extremely frustrated for most of the season. But as long as we see improvement from the beginning to the end of the season, that's fine. And you know what, Eric, I really do enjoy low expectations, because I go into a movie a lot of times and I see like a movie's gotten fantastic reviews and my expectations are sky high, and I go in there and the movie's good. I'm like, well, that's as good as I thought it was going to be. But then you go in and you go to a movie and you just expect to be entertained for 2 hours, but even though you saw the reviews are trash, and you walk out thinking, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. That's how I want to feel about Arizona. They weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be. Maybe they're going to win 3 or 4 games, and as long as they get that. And Matt talked about hearing things about like Noah Fafita and Kean Burnett, they're going to hear about, well, if Arizona's not that good, do you really want to go there? I don't think that's going to be an issue as long as they're better wherever that bar happens to be by the end of the season compared to the beginning of the season. And I think if this team, there's one thing about this team I think we're going to take away that's going to be a positive at the end of the season is that they're well coached. I think they're going to be a very well coached team. And I think you're going to see that improvement. I think the BYU game is going to be ugly. And I actually think it's going to be a higher scoring game than you might think. But I think that between then and the ASU game, I'm not saying they're going to beat ASU, but I think by the end of the season, health permitting, they're going to be much more competitive against the Sun Devils in the last game of the season than they're going to be against BYU in the first game of the season.
So we'll do our predictions probably next week, and then we'll do the we'll do our week 1 predictions the following week after that. One thing that I was just thinking about as you were chatting, Shane, Arizona, I think a key for them this year, and this is going to sound stupid, but go with it. You got to get early leads if you're the Wildcats, because this is not a team that's going to play well from behind. I don't see, based on what Matt said with, Gunnar Cruz, we don't have that quarterback who's going to gunsling it down the field often. You're trailing by 14 in the fourth quarter. He's going to lead us to 2 touchdowns. I don't see Arizona doing that this season. Now, maybe we'll be surprised, and maybe Gunnar Cruz or Will Plummer or McLeod will step up, but that really concerns me. If you get down 21-0, I mean, you might as well just turn the game off, just kind of like what we did with ASU last year when it was 14-0 in the first 51 seconds. I mean, we knew that nobody was going to bring that team back because clearly they had quit. I'm concerned, even though the team will have a lot of fight this year, I just think offensively, you have the wide receiving talent. Who's going to get them the ball? This team is going to be most successful when the run opens up the pass. When you can run, the Michael Wileys, Drake Anderson, Stevie Rockers, Jalen Johns, and have that ball control. Arizona holds the ball for 35 minutes. They're gonna have a much better chance of winning as compared to 24 minutes and being down 21-0 in the second quarter. I know it's a fairly obvious take, but that really concerns me this year as compared to previous seasons, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think one thing that I would like to see, whoever Arizona's starting quarterback is discipline. Be disciplined enough for your limitations and to not do stupid stuff and force the ball into coverage and to run, you're scrambling out of the pocket, scramble 10 yards backwards and take a sack that didn't need to be, 10, 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Check downs. They have tailbacks who can catch the ball. Do some bubble screens, throw some short passes, screen passes to wide receivers in space. You've got a lot of speed. Tavion Cunningham in particular, who Matt Moreno talked about, got a lot of speed. You can get some blocking for those guys. Let your playmakers make plays. And that sounded about as cliche as it possibly can be, but you know what I'm saying. Let the guys around you do what they can do and and realize those limitations. Don't turn the ball over. Punting the ball is not as bad as turning the ball over in your own territory. So as long as they have a quarterback who's smart enough and disciplined enough to know that, okay, I'm not good at this. I can't do this. I need to work on this. My coach is telling me that to stay away from the deep pass or whatever the situation is, and have that wherewithal on the field to not make mistakes. It's going to be boring. It's going to be frustrating at times, but as long as you don't turn the ball over and you give your defense a chance to make plays on their side of the ball. Another thing about the BYU game, BYU lost 7 of their top 10 tacklers from last season. So you have an opportunity there. And by the way, I learned that from Phil Steele's 2021 college football preview. So I think Arizona actually might put up some points in that game as long as they're able to open up the run a little bit, to throw some checkdowns, get the ball to receivers and tailbacks in space. And you don't have to throw the home run pass. You don't have to have the long scramble where you end up getting sacked 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage and make a dumb throw. As long as they're able to do those things, as long as whoever the quarterback is able to do those things and be disciplined enough to know that they're not capable of doing certain things, I think they have a chance to maybe put up 20, 30 points a game.
Wow. I hope you're onto something there, Shane. But listen, we're just glad we're able to talk about football, and we're able to talk about it in August. Whereas last year we were about going up about on a year when we started this podcast up again, and we didn't know what was going to happen, and we didn't have live sports for 2 months after that, and we were just kind of like trying to figure out what the heck we were going to talk about until then. And who would have thought that we would have pretty much since then. It's been a pretty action-packed time with 5 new head coaches in all pretty much the big sports except for women's basketball. A women's basketball team going to the finals, and softball and baseball going to their respective final eights. So we've had a pretty good run. So it's been a fun year, and I want to thank our friends at All AZ Sports for being a part of that now and doing the video podcast. And check them out, allazsports.com. But a lot of good things to come, Shane. Really looking forward to seeing what happens with football season. Only a few weeks away, and then we'll have a lot to kind of figure out about this Arizona team. Will they improve as the season goes along or not? But I want to thank Matt Moreno, senior editor for Go AZ Cats, for joining us. Shane, as always, good insight, and we'll be back next week with more entertaining takes, I'm sure. For Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. As always, bear down.